We are going to move to begin to discuss all those issues that have been raised in our opening speeches. That key question, how do we not just adjust to the new world, but shape it? What do we need to do? The President there underlining very firmly the key role that all of you have to play in that process. We will discuss what you need from them as well in order to do it. And we will report back, Madam President. So thank you very much. Can I ask you, please, to retake your seats now? Thank you. So, we will now move to our first panel debate. And we come back to that point that the President made when she talked about external policies and what we need to do in that area, but also what do we need to do internally in order to be fit and ready for this new world. So the title of this session is A Changing Europe in a Changing World, and we will address both issues. I am delighted to welcome first onto the stage Maroš Šefčovič, who is European Commission Vice President for Interinstitutional Relations and Foresight, who's going to come and have a chat with me. Mr. Vice President, thank you very much for joining us. Please do come and join me here in the comfy seats. Ladies and gentlemen, Maroš Šefčovič.
Over here.
And I have a couple of questions for the Vice President. Then I will bring up the rest of our panel. I have some questions for them. And then I will come out to all of you later on for your questions and comments. So a very warm welcome, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you very much.
One of the things the President spoke about there was vision and foresight. And it's in your job title. It is, you are Mr. Foresight in Brussels. So you're going to have your first Foresight report soon. Can you give us some insight into what it's likely to reveal?
Yeah, I think that you've been listening very carefully to my boss, and I think it's quite clear that the ambition of this commission is clearly to be among the global top players. And I'm trying to kind of insert certain filter for all our actions which we do in the commission. That filter is actually very simple, and I believe that the business leaders would agree with me. All our actions which we do should make sure that not now, not in 5 years, but also in post-2030 world, we should be among top 3 economies. We should simply have that competitiveness, we should have that power, we should have that size, because it would not have only geopolitical implications if we are not there, but it would have, as also in your video it was rightly pointed out, consequences on our social model. So we simply need to be competitive to be socially fair. And I think that's one of the premise which I'm introducing in all the analytics we do right now. What the annual Foresight report would reveal, of course, at first it would be the importance of anticipatory governance on developing further our ability to look a little bit over the horizon, and also how to make all that wealth of information and data we are getting from our excellent researchers, but also from business leaders, and a lot of ideas we are getting regularly from BusinessEurope as well, and I really would like to thank to Markus and President Gattas for that, and how to make it politically relevant. So what we discussed with the President, and she's very supportive of the idea that we want to come always, let's say in May, June, with the annual Foresight report, where we would highlight the trends, the mega trends, the emerging new developments which are so important for shaping our policies and economy. So we can have a discussion with the social partners in June. Hopefully we can have a look at our report by the European leaders in the European Council in June. And then after the discussion over the summer, I believe that best takeaways or the most reasonable arguments which we will bring can be then used by our President in the State of the Union report in September, and then of course this is one of the most important contributions to the Commission work program, for which I'm also responsible. So, so this is how we want to close the loop and make sure that we could use the anticipatory governance and foresight into our policy decision making. What would be the topic this year? We are currently looking at the resilience of the European economy, strategic autonomy, all the emerging mega trends, and we want to set the tone that also in the foresight we want to have a global excellence and want to be partner to the OECD, World Economic Forum and others who are very eager to be in a close partnership with us, and we of course very much welcome that.
So, as you say, a very clear line for not only delivering the foresight, but implementing what we deliver. How do you see the influence of this report in terms of not just priority setting, but that crucial issue of linking policies together? Because we always talk about the problem of silo policy making and this attempt to introduce more coherence. Do you think the Foresight's report will help there too?
I definitely believe so. And, you know, Al Gore, I think he very famously said that there always need to be somebody to tell sometimes also inconvenient truth. And I believe that should be me. I mean, with this job title. But of course, we do not want only to bring out the bad news, because we have a lot of positive developments, a lot of encouraging signals, especially in our economy. The thing is that how from that wealth of ideas we would make also our decision making, and then the policy and industrial and economic implications more relevant. The President was kind enough to mention European Battery Alliance, which I am leading right now, and you know that we established it 2 years ago. It's very successful endeavor, and it's successful because it's industry-led. We just use the convening power of the Commission, got the best minds, best companies around the table with the best researchers, and set the framework where we want to go, and supported it by the financial means. And I believe that the same pattern we should use for all other strategic technologies, like it was mentioned, clean tech, hydrogen, of course, access to the raw materials and other areas, which would decide if Europe will be on that medal podium in post-2030 world or not. And I think we should use that collective esprit de corps in Europe to make sure that we would really remain one of the top 3 economies also in post-2030 world.
Thank you. So let's bring up some other panelists to discuss that, some representatives from industry and also some diplomats and policymakers. Let's invite them on the stage. I'm delighted to welcome Dita Charanzová, MEP, Vice President of the European Parliament and a member of the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee. A warm welcome, Dita. Please come and sit next to the Vice President. Dame Carolyn Fairbairn, who is Director General of the Confederation of British Industry, CBI. A very warm welcome to you. Steffen Kampeter, CEO of the Confederation of German Employers Associations, BDA.
Hello, nice meeting you.
His Excellency Kazuo Kodama, Ambassador of Japan to the European Union, and Pekka Lundmark, President of the Confederation of Finnish Industries, EK, and the newly appointed CEO of Nokia. A very warm welcome to you as well. So we're going to dive straight into that discussion. As I said, I've got some questions for the panel, and then I will come out to all of you a little bit later on. Dita Charanzová, perhaps if I could start with you. We've heard from the President and also from the Vice President about the importance of adapting, not just adapting, but shaping this future world. So as we look at a changing Europe and a changing world, what do you see as the key challenges ahead that will be so important for the people in this room?
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I think it's always a unique possibility to have on the same panel business, diplomats, policymakers, and representatives of different institutions. To your question, yes, indeed, everything is changing, but this is not new. In Europe, what we see was the new parliament, and let me give you more the European Parliament's perspective, is definitely a new shift to the overall agenda. We have all noticed, and it has been already highlighted by Madam President, the green agenda, which will have an impact on everything. From the business perspective, I would be worried when it comes to what's going to happen in the internal market. I carefully listened to what has been said, and I was the one who asked then the candidate, Madam Ursula von der Leyen, if she can make a promise to me that she will do her best to complete the single market. And her response was, yes, but I haven't seen it on the paper since then. And when I talk to my colleagues in the European Parliament that our priority has to be to have a single market and completion of the single market, I don't have a unique and one single answer to it. I struggle to have it in the policy papers, even in the European Parliament. And second issue from the business point of view is definitely what's going to happen with our trade agenda with with the third countries. Well, I've been in the trade agenda for more than 20 years. I remember the old times where we spoke just about a free trade agenda. Then we shifted it to deep comprehensive agenda, and now we will have green deep comprehensive agenda. And I wonder what it means for business.
Thank you. We'll come back on that and the Parliament's approach to that a little bit later on. Dame Carolyn Fairbairn, very warm welcome. In terms of the key challenges you see it, to not just adapt, as the President was saying, but also to make sure Europe really can shape this future. How do you see the challenge ahead, and are you encouraged by what you're hearing today from the policy approach to this?
Well, first of all, I am very encouraged. And I have to say, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. So the UK has now been outside the European Union for a month, but we are still here. We are still part of Europe. And actually... and delighted to be part of this conversation about how we make the continent of Europe a fantastic place to live, work and start a business, because I think that will drive prosperity in the future. So what are the biggest priorities, I think, for Europe? I think for us, one of the most important is the decisions we take work for communities on the ground. We've all had a wake-up call just about the effectiveness of our economic model for really reaching into all of the communities of our countries. And what our citizens are telling us is that we need to do better. We know in the UK that we have left behind parts of the north where growth has not been high enough. We saw the unemployment figures in parts of the European Union. So I think the first test of anything we do, and I'd like to have seen more of that perhaps in the conversation so far, that sense of unfairness, that sense of people being left behind. And I think there are some areas where Europe, I'm a great optimist about Europe, because I think the values and that sense of balance between inclusion and the unleashing of market spirits is really strong here, and how that is now made to work. And I would pick two major priorities. First of them would be unleashing innovation. Yeah. There is such innovation on this continent. The quality of our universities, our science research, our digital, you see it in all of the cities of Europe. We think London, but many cities across the UK are fabulous. How do we unleash that around climate change, around digital? Let's have a long-term agenda for that. And the second is unleashing the capabilities of our people. Delighted to hear the President speak so strongly about the skills agenda. We must bring people on this journey, training them in the skills of the future. Absolutely. And there, Jacki, a phrase that we've used in the UK from time to time, we need a partnership of the century between business and government in order to be able to make this transformation work for people and communities across our countries.
And both issues we're going to delve into in our subsequent panels later on, and I also will ask you about Brexit, but not now. Let's focus on the very positive first, and we can come back to the more difficult later. Steffen Kampeter, from your perspective, and the challenge ahead as you see it.
First of all, I think we have to press competitiveness as a bigger issue as is in the political debate now. If you see the agenda of the Commission for the next years, it seems to be about social and environmental issues. And as President Pekka does pointed out, without prosperity things will not work. So the precondition for everything the Commission wants is that we put competitiveness first, and we could put pressure on the political debate that they understand that all their activities cannot fulfill without prosperous economies, and therefore actually, I haven't heard something on red tape today much. I haven't heard much about one in, one out, and all that stuff we need. So we have to put competitiveness back on number one on the agenda. Number two is, I would say, if the top priority of the Commission is the Green Deal, probably we have to force them as a challenge to make Green Deal as a business case. Today, for example, the Environmental Ministers Committee has invited Greta Thunberg as an expert on climate change and these issues. I'm not quite sure whether she will deliver something to make a Green Deal a business case. They should have invited Pierre Gattaz or other European leaders in the convention just to give inspiration. That if the approval of the Paris goal on climate shall be reached with minimum costs, probably they have to integrate business aspects more than they already have done yet. And my number 3 priority, Carolyn has pointed it out, is skills. Everybody's talking about digi and thinks it's a tech issue. I believe that's right, but tech does not work without skilled labor. And therefore, actually, the skill gap we've seen already is the biggest challenge for the acceptance of future economic development. If we have what some predict, I do not believe that, mass unemployment because of tech, yeah, there will be not only yellow vests in Paris, but we will all have a very critical debate with our workforce. Why invest in tech? What does Digi mean for my labor? The answer to this is a skill revolution, not only in the companies but in the education system, and we have to bridge actual skills to future skills. That is a real revolutionary task, and that will be my priority number 3.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Kodama, listening to this discussion and Europe asking itself, does it want to be a global player, as the President said, or the playground, how do you see the challenge ahead? As someone who has a very close relationship with the EU, an ambitious trade agreement, and working together, how do you see the challenge ahead?
Yes, well, first of all, thank you very much for giving me this kind of great opportunity to discuss all these issues. Number 1, I think, before I'm coming over to Brussels, I've been here for the last 3.5 years. Before that, I was in Paris. I was ambassador to OECD, where actually I was fully engaged with OECD's horizon scanning, strategic foresight exercise, all those years. So I wish Commissioner Šefčovič well, I think. And so then, based on my own experience, I've been always thinking about whatever action we take, prescription we take, we have to first identify the mega trends, right? Megatrends, the spirits of the Geist, right, of the world. Now, I say just 3. Actually, nobody up to now mentioned this, but one important trend is the demographic change. This is so relevant to our issues like the inequalities and so on, and also, of course, unemployment, all these issues. But this is a huge issue, which is related to this, the pillar of people. Number 2, of course, is the climate change, of course. No need for me to add anything. Number 3 is the prosperity. That is, again, nobody really said about these days, globalization. This is maybe positive side, negative side, but I say globalization will continue inexorably, even in the face of the coronavirus, or even in the face of, say, security risk posed by the completely digitalized world. I think this is inexorable. But so we have to simply, the challenge is for us to rein in. We have to shape or navigate the way forward of the globalization. My final point, I would rather ask then the business leaders. The challenge actually, right now, of course, those are megatrends. But really, I think the most serious challenge confronting the trilateral world, United States, EU, Japan, is simply this, the secular stagnation. Why on earth we are still suffering from the synchronized, very low growth rate, somewhere in between 0 to 2%. And then none of us, I think, Europe, ECB or Japan, Bank of Japan, have been able to reach the target, inflation target. So what is the reason? I say, actually, one is, of course, in Japan, demographic change, declining population, and also fast-aging, society structure. But what else? I think Japanese companies are hoarding, some say hoarding, enormous amount of internal reserve. And then I ask him, why? But ambassador, because future is so unpredictable, so stable, volatile. Are you forced me to invest money for nothing, but there must be a way forward. So then, of course, somebody say deregulation, of course. Government is responsible to take more deregulation. But so anyway, I think let's discuss more on what are really, I think, stemming from more ambitious investment. Today I heard, President view, very encouraging. So I just want to see that happen.
And as you say, what can we do in an uncertain world to give as much stability and predictability that is so vital for that investment, a point that the President made. Pekka Lundmark, complete the picture for me, if you will, in terms of the challenge ahead, and that mix, if you like, of challenge and opportunity, how you see it.
Well, first of all, the challenge is really, really big. I would go as far as saying that even when we look at what's happening in the world, the core European idea, I would say, is challenged. What is the core European idea? To me, it has always been free market economy implemented in a socially and environmentally responsible way, which means that things like free trade are extremely, completely, absolutely essential for us. And now when we look at what's happening in the world, the rise of populism, protectionism, and unilateralism, and the politicization of trade, it's challenging our fundamental core values. So that's why it's more important now than ever that Europe stays united. We need free trade. We have a lot to complete in the internal market for our own free trade. Vice President Šefčovič was responsible for the energy union. It was mentioned here that I moved to Nokia, but I'm still currently working in the energy industry. We have significant steps still to take inside Europe to complete the internal market. And then, of course, we need to continue to work on even though it's extremely difficult to work on the free trade agreements with the other parts of the world. But at the same time, when we are dealing with these challenges, the opportunity side, I think it's enormous. I think President von der Leyen's speech was wonderful, talking about the opportunities. She said and mentioned exactly the right things. But then I fully agree with Mr. Kampeter that probably the most important thing on the agenda, which is the Green Deal, has to be developed to a business case. Yeah. But I am optimistic that if we do it in the right way and remember to build the steering instruments in a market-based way, and we have a great foundation in the European emission trading system, and it can be developed further, we have all the possibilities to develop it to a business case. But then comes, of course, to the fundamental question that we can't do it alone in Europe. Europe is today 9% of world's emissions. We saw in this excellent video that in 2030 it will be 5% of the emissions. So while we are developing the European system and developing things like emission trading to cover more and more sectors and to become more and more ambitious, it's crucially important that we then do everything we can to discuss with countries like China. If I had a dream, I would launch some kind of an integrated carbon trading system with China as the next goal, and maybe it's not a completely impossible thing, because unless we do something like this, there is a risk that the European population will turn against us when we implement it.
I'm going to come back on that issue this afternoon. We have a panel devoted to the Green Deal, but the words the President used about co-creation and co-design, if we are to meet this challenge, find the solutions, that very much music to your ears from what you're saying. I'd like to come back, if I might, on the competitiveness issue, the completion of the single market, and focus first, if I can, on more this external dimension. And really just ask, this phrase, geopolitical commission, we heard the President talk about what it means for her, and I just wanted to ask, what does it mean to you, Mr. Vice President? What is the implications of a geopolitical commission in terms of these trade challenges we're talking about, in relation to China, in relation to the US? What does it really mean to be a geopolitical commission?
Of course, we can have different aspects from the foreign policy down to the competition of democratic or governance models, and down to the trade. But I think for the panel over here, the most important, I think, is aspect of the industry competitiveness and the global trade. And I was at several occasions in China and in United States where we discussed these aspects. And to our Chinese partners, I was also always delivering a message. Please treat our European companies in China as we treat your companies in Europe. And I think that's very important also for the future, because we are strong champions of the global trade, but we are now at the stage where we cannot afford anymore that we would not have level playing field in the global terms. So it means that we cannot continue with the fact that we would push our industry to produce proper low carbon products and then import heavy carbon steel, cement or machinery to Europe, because in that case we would just harm our industry and we would not help to tackle climate change.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think this must be a little bit more globally understood, and we should also look at this from the point of view as a, I would say, enforcement of the Paris Agreement, because all countries sign up to it, and therefore we should fulfill it. So I think we will be really looking into the measures of more reciprocity, fairness, level playing field. Carbon adjustment mechanism is one of the tools, and I would agree with my colleagues, Mr. Lundmark, with whom we spend a lot of hours to discuss the energy union, how to set it fairly, that it would be WTO compatible and at the same time would encourage the economies like China, and we know there are many other countries which have certain type of ETS mechanism to kind of level it up. For me, of course, in the long term, the best solution would be if the carbon would have a global price.
Yeah.
So we can look it on the internet as we see today, what is the price of oil, of gas, to have the price for carbon. That would really be a revolutionary change. I think it would be one of the major ways how we can advance the fair global trade and really tackle the climate change.
Dita Charanzová, in terms of trade, we heard Pierre Gattaz talking earlier, and he was talking about that rebalancing of the relationship with our key partners. The President also spoke of it. She spoke of the efforts being made to focus on what is positive in our relationship with the US, for example. He also talked about reinforcing the multilateral framework and working on those bilateral deals. For you, as we enter this more difficult era, this more protectionist era, the protectionism on the rise, what do you see as the key challenge? And do you think the new parliament has changed its attitude, changed its approach?
First of all, I think the main challenge is to go on, because the European Union has been always the advocate for the multilateral rules-based system. We are getting in a little bit isolation. We lost our main partner, the US, who has been always with us from the very beginning. But we have to continue. We have to continue fight for the rules-based system. In parallel, of course, and it's also a very good example that the European Union hasn't given up on our free, and I would say especially free trade policy, because we've been having this discussion whether our trade policy should be free and fair or fair and free. So I'm saying free and fair trade policy. And it's from the Parliament's positive side, the positive signal we sent right at the beginning is that we approve the trade agreement with Vietnam. Which is, I think, very good example that we are sending as a parliament. Has the parliament changed? Yes. Yes, indeed. When I listen to the discussion on, for instance, the agreement with Mercosur countries, I'm worried. I'm the one who has been advocating for this agreement. We've been negotiating this agreement for more than 20 years. Now we have it on the table. It's a unique possibility and occasion for us, a momentum.
And your concern?
And my concern is what I hear from the debate is, well, it's not, we don't address sufficiently all the concerns of the citizens. And there I very much agree that even in the trade policy, we need to get citizens more involved. We saw it with TTIP. We saw it with the ratification in Netherlands with the agreement with Canada. And the same goes for Mercosur, where I hear more voices saying, well, we had the Amazon forest fire, so we should stop all this agreement because it's not enough. So I would just plead the free trade agreements are a good tool, how we can address all the concerns, but we should not overload the boat.
Thank you. Ambassador, if I could come to you just on this point about fighting to maintain the rules-based order, because you have been working with the European Union and indeed the US. You had a meeting last year, you had another meeting in January on this issue. How do you see the way ahead? And do you believe that something can be done both to uphold and to update, because it's in desperate need of updating, the multilateral trade system? What do you and Europe need to do together?
Well, I think the answer seems to be fairly straightforward. I think, just to come back just to LPF, level playing field, and also, in my view, of course, making the Commission a geopolitical, of course, is again, Commissioner rightly said, I think to apply rules on LPF, and then also reciprocity could be applied all over the world, including China, not only amongst OECD countries. So the answer is very simple, but how? So for that matter, again, I would again acknowledge EU has a huge regulatory power. Some people say EU is a regulatory superpower. Maybe so. But then, the important thing is, but I would say, but please, just to consult us, please continue to consult outside EU, non-EU member states like Japan or United States. By so doing, then again, if we agree upon trilateral, setup, US, Japan, EU, then maybe Canada, Australia, New Zealand, all like-minded countries who share the fundamental values, we take it to the WTO in Geneva. And then I think engage China to encourage China to come forward or coming on board. Brazil, South Africa, Russia, you name it. So I think really what is necessary, of course, is a political will. And then I think with now Madame von der Leyen in charge, I think, Prime Minister Abe is so much committed. And then I think, yes, we can do it. And then finally, of course, now from the February the 1st of last year, EPA agreement between Japan and EU now entered in force. And then I'm happy to tell, I'm actually sending out this message to European people, Japanese people. Over the last 1 year, both sides have recorded 6+ % real increase in trade. So this is a very balanced outcome, positive. And then also regulatory alignment
Get
also
that
is a
message
big
out
plus. Yes.
to everyone that
So,
it works. Thank you very much. Pekka, you talked about a concern about the politicization of trade. And we're talking here about the US. We've been talking already about China. In terms of how business can combat that. We've heard Phil Hogan, the Trade Commissioner, talk about just because we become more assertive doesn't mean we become protectionist. But are you concerned, as Dita Charanzová is indicating, that we may be going that way? And if so, what do we need to do?
Well, the concern is absolutely there, but from my personal point of view, it's easy to say that, of course, businesses want free trade, but now there is a danger that the European response would be that also Europe turns into protectionism, and I would really want to be careful with this one. Let's do everything we can in our power to not let that happen, because that would be against everything that is important for us. And I would build on what Ambassador Kodama here said, that we need to find like-minded partners, and in this respect, the partnership between Europe and Japan is one of the very natural partnerships, because we both share the same values around rule-based trade and ambition to free trade. From business point of view, the only thing that we can really do is to make sure that the politicians understand the fundamental importance to our economy and to our prosperity of free trade. It's not a zero-sum game, as some of the world leaders are trying to present it to be.
So, Steffen, we need to rebalance. But we need to get that right. That is the key, to get that balance. And you underlined some of these issues in relation to competitiveness and so on. How do you see the way ahead in terms of getting that right in terms of trade policy?
I agree with most of it said to open markets in a rule-based economy. I'd like to add 2 sketches on the picture. First of all, it seems to be that some are thinking if Trump leaves the White House, everything is like the good old days. I think this is a wrong perception. If you see the debate on international trade and globalization in the United States, first of all, you see a more protectionist Democratic Party. If you listen to Bernie Sanders, I'm just coming back from DC and Texas and South Carolina, and I have some smell of the actual debate in the US. If there's another face in the White House, we will have probably a different tone, but the similar challenges. Yeah. For example, Steve Bannon was giving a speech where he said, Corona reveals that we are right in an anti-globalization policy. because disintegration of the global value chain is necessary for the United States. He's representing a stronghold in the Republican Party. So we see that the case we have to make why globalization and international supply chain management is useful for the people, not only here in Europe, but to all other fields. This is actually the case politically we have to make. Because I believe if we don't take up that debate, we will be surprised if a lady or man who is not Mr. Trump will join the White House. We will face the same challenges. They will not love WTO the next day. They will not love open markets. They will have the same problem with the commissioner, whether Hogan is still in charge or others. It is a dramatically changing world, and do not believe it's not only because of the parties have changed.
Okay.
The old generation, World War II and all these things, they have gone. And if you see how the American population has changed, they're much more Asian, Hispanics, persons of color, and this will be a new challenge for our debate, and Europe hasn't integrated that into the debate yet.
Thank you very much. Carolyn, I have to ask about
Yes.
Brexit. Pierre Gattaz talked, of course, about the importance of a close relationship, but on the UK side now, you're not even allowed to say the word. Diplomats are banned from asking for a deep relationship. They're banned from talking about a close relationship. They're just told to talk about a relationship, a basic deal. So where does this go? How can we mitigate against this approach for you as business? Tell us, give us some insight.
I will absolutely do that. I mean, the first thing to say is I think from the UK side, we are absolutely in a new phase. I just thought, just describing what the UK feels like now. So it used to be the case, if you walk past the Houses of Parliament, there were protest groups on both sides. You couldn't move without somebody yelling in your ear, either stop Brexit or do Brexit. That has gone. That has gone. There is now a sense that the UK has moved on, we have left. It may not be everybody's first choice, and I think you know where a number of us in the business community stood originally, but actually that is where we are. And I think the really important thing now is that we get some sense of optimism and can-do into the relationship we're trying to create together. I mean, I think one of the striking things, and it feeds into the conversation we've just had about trade, if we only talk about risk and fear, we will not get the right outcome. Yeah. The best trade deals are based on hope and optimism and vision. And actually, I was also just in the US talking about the possibilities for a US-UK trade deal. I don't think anybody underestimates the challenge, but the opportunities around setting global standards in areas like insurance and AI are the next generation of what we can do together. So I think my response, Jacki, on this is that we need to move on from where we were in the withdrawal agreement negotiations. We're now trying to negotiate a trade deal that works for our communities, that protects our businesses and takes us on to a new stage of prosperity. And if both sides go into that negotiation with that ambition in mind, a vision and hope rather than risk and fear, I think we stand the best chance of a good outcome.
Thank you for that positive message, which I think will be music to people's ears. Are there any... I want to come back to the internal, making Europe stronger, a stronger Europe in the world in a moment. But are there any questions or comments to our panel at this stage? Anybody want to join in our discussion, or are you enjoying watching me grill? Thank you, sir. And if you could introduce yourself, and could I ask you to be brief? Thank you.
Yes, my name is Hans van der Loo. I'm the EU STEM ambassador, so promoting education. And I've got a question because several people this morning stated that the EU is only 9% of world emissions and that others are growing. That actually confirms the need, Peggy, for a better education, because the low percentage of the EU emissions is only the result of relocation, not reduction. So my question is, since we only have one planet, does this kind of perspective not hinder the development of really future-proof policies? And unless we can kick the emissions to another planet, is it not necessary to measure emissions honestly and based on location of demand rather than location of production?
Thank you very much. I would, if it's okay with you, can I hold that question? Because that's precisely what we're going to focus on in our Green Deal, this discussion. If anybody wants to pick up briefly, but we are going to really devote time to that later on. Anybody? Yes, let me come over this way. Thank you, sir. Let's do a little bit of working together to get the mic to you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. My name is Pierre Gröning, representing German chemical industry. I think it has been said that Europe has a declining contribution to the world climate in terms of CO2 emissions, which is very positive. And I think this will further continue, which is also very positive. I think the debate has turned very much into the direction kind of how is the world to adapt to kind of meet our standards. And I think we can understand that. At the same time, I'm not entirely sure if that will happen actually, if others will kind of meet our standards and kind of climb up. I think the kind of bit the opposite is unfortunately the truth. So while we don't like it, I think we have to adapt to that situation. And so the question is like, how much do we do kind of to look at others and rely on them, or how much do we need to look at ourselves and change, and then maybe in a more fundamental way to create the right enabling conditions for business to be successful?
Which really links back to what the ambassador was saying about we are a regulatory superpower, but we need to use that power wisely and well. Any others at this point? Or, yeah, I see one in the front, and then we'll come back to the panel. Thank you very much, sir.
Good morning. My name is Frank Heemskerk, European Roundtable for Industry. My question to the panel, and especially also to Mr. Lundmark, is what would be your definition of economic, but especially even of digital sovereignty for Europe? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So what does it look like? What does digital economic sovereignty look? Pick up on that point. And that, I think, also does link to the point about the world adapting to us or us adapting more to the world. Mr. Vice President first.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question, because I think it's at the core of our discussion, and it would be one of the deciding elements when we will be implementing the Green Deal. How to make our economy prosper, how to make sure that Europe will contribute to the climate change, and at the same time how not to lose our competitiveness and actually help the world. And I think here what we have to look for is really Europe becoming the not only leading by example, but leading exporters of the clean tech technologies. Because as colleagues rightly pointed out, we will be at 5% of the global CO2 emissions by 2030. So how lower we can go. But if we would use our first mover advantage and export this clean tech technology to Africa, to India, to other big economies which are currently also big polluters, or who are in need of dramatic economic growth, and they cannot repeat our fossil mistakes of the past, that I think would be our major contribution, not only to our industry, but also to the outside world. So that would be my answer to that. Regulatory superpower, I agree with the ambassador, and we know how we can shape, I would say, these new technologies in a way which would reflect that big global ambition. Just to take example again from the batteries, we are currently working on the standards for the batteries, which I believe would bring us to the moment where the Europe will be producing the best, cleanest, greenest batteries on this planet. Because what our consumers need, they want to have a full story. They want to have clean cars with the most sustainable batteries, with the clean energy which is powering them. And this is what we are aiming for, and there where I believe the market will also absolutely wake up. One comment on the chemical industry. I think we shouldn't forget that chemical industry is absolutely key for European success for the future. When we've been looking at the global supply chains, and we discovered that what we need is processed, refined lithium for our batteries. Surprise, surprise, we have lithium in Europe, and if we would use all the reserves we have in Czech Republic, in Portugal, in Finland, we could be actually world exporter of the lithium. But we do not have one single refinery for the lithium. So even if we have it, we have to ship it all over to China to get it refined and get it back. So this is not, I would say, sustainable model, and therefore we have to be very strategic also in these sectors where we really need supply chains which would be closer to the production side, where we would not be worried about any kind of developments like we see today with coronavirus, that the supply chains are broken. So be more strategic, focus on what we really need, and really looking for cutting-edge technology.
And on the point of batteries, ladies and gentlemen, later on we're going to hear from Karl-Erik Lagercrantz, who is chairman and co-founder of Northvolt. They are doing great things in this area. We will hear from him a little bit later. But Carolyn, you wanted to come in.
Well, I just wanted to come in because the UK is hosting COP26 in Glasgow in in November. And we do want it, to this point about the world and the importance of innovation, how we use it to showcase the best of European and global innovation. And one of the really encouraging facts of the last 3 decades is, although political solutions on climate change have tended to underdeliver, technological ones have over-delivered year in, year out. And I agree with some of the technologies talked about, batteries. I think hydrogen also is a potential European competitive advantage. And just to make that offer really to the room and beyond about how we use COP26 to showcase those technologies and really help to drive change in other countries.
Pekka, you wanted to come in?
Yes, if I answer the digital sovereignty question, I promise that my answer will be perhaps more sophisticated in a few months when I have started with Nokia, so I'll say this with all possible disclaimers at this stage. But you hear these suggestions that Europe should develop Europe's own browser, or Europe should develop our own platforms. We have to remember that Europe does not develop browsers, companies develop browsers, companies develop platforms, and now it just happens to be the fact that the big 5 American data companies have pretty much taken the ownership of that particular phase of the digital economy. There is a big opportunity for Europe going forward, and that has to do with 5G and the fact that the combination of 5G and industrial IoT will be a game changer in how industrial value chains will operate. So far, mobile communications has changed the world, has changed the way how people communicate, and it has enabled then through mobile phones, social media, video, and so on. But the next big thing will be a change in industrial value chains, enabled, as I said, of the combination of 5G and industrial IoT and backed up by artificial intelligence. And now we need to do everything we can in our power to make sure that we also then get successful European companies when this business starts to develop its own platforms in the same way as we have seen these American platforms to be developed earlier.
Okay. Thank you. Steffen, could I come back to you? You underlined the importance of putting competitiveness back at the centre, and several of you have underlined the importance of completing the single market and addressing better regulation issues. When we look at the industrial strategy to be unveiled next week, and Business Europe has called for a much more strategic approach, what do you really want to see? And crucially within that, we've also talked about public trust, bringing the public along with us, and so on. How do you see that as coming from the employer side? How do you see making us as consumers, as workers, as citizens feel that we're all part of this?
First of all, if I look on investment, take 90% of the investment is private. And only up to 10% comes from the public sector, at least these average European figures. So if we need industrial or investment strategy, we have to focus on the private sector and the framework for private investment in Europe. This is something actually we shall focus on. I've heard that the Commission says on the Green Deal we will mobilize 1,000 billion, with I think 70 billion coming from the public. This is highly leveraged, and therefore actually we need stable circumstances. There might be an approach on a common level playing field. We need less red tape, and probably free room for maneuvers for investment on the fields where business cases are viable. Number two is I already made the case that the Green Deal must be a business case, and if I take up the concerns, my colleague from the chemistry industry, there is much concern when we have to be outspoken on that decarbonization means deindustrialization. I think Pierre made this point in his speech, and I believe there are many activists and NGOs who really believe in this and take up the argument, see the Green Deal as a leverage, making a different form of society where the business relevance is not so real. And actually, this is actually where we should focus on it. And number three is, do not underestimate red tape. Actually, I said this was a very good pro-business speech by President von der Leyen. but there are some aspects where I feel this is not less red tape, this is more red tape, which he is bringing back on the
Thank
table.
you.
This is very crucial to
I'm
us.
going to give the Vice President a chance to answer that in a moment. But Dita, just briefly, if you would, because we're almost out of time and I want to identify some priorities. What do you hope to see in the industrial strategy next week?
For me, it's not about what I want to see in or out. I want to see the tone, the message. Because, and it's going back to the question that I wanted also to respond on the digital sovereignty. Because we all, I think, nobody would say I'm against digital sovereignty. But the question is how you want to achieve it.
Yeah.
I come from the Czech Republic, where we have not only Google, we have also a Czech search engine company, Seznam. They share the market 50-50. And it was not the Czech government saying, well, it will be 50% Google market, 50% Czech company market. For me to achieve the digital sovereignty is to have the digital single market, the level playing field for the businesses. But we are living in the interconnected world. I fear that was perhaps a good idea of trying to build up the European champions, we can start building the walls, the protectionist walls in Europe, and that's my concern.
So, Mr. Vice President, a lot of what you have said, what the President said, music to this room's ears, but a concern.
Absolutely.
Not enough about the single market, not enough about red tape. How do you answer that?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to, I believe, reassure my colleagues in the panel, Dita and Steffen especially. You will, I believe that you will be pleased with the industrial strategy of the next week, because one part of it would be devoted to the single market enforcement, because this is what we feel also in the Commission, that especially in some parts we are all lagging behind, or we are not enforcing it strongly enough. So we definitely are going to develop the instruments and the new possibilities, how to make sure that we would enforce it with much more vigor. And then, of course, what we very often need is concrete information from the ground. So here I think the Business Europe would be a very good partner to flag out where you feel that it's lacking, where it's not working, where it's not properly transposed. And one in, one out, I can tell you that I'm working on it a lot. So we will be coming with our communication on this in a couple of months, and I just really would like to assure you that we are looking for a best way how to make it realistic, ambitious enough, and not mechanical, because of course there are differences between European and the national level. So just to tell you, currently we are testing the best on the shelf what we have right now, OECD tool to measure administrative burden, and we will be looking how we can offset the burdens which are bringing with the new legislation in the sector by offsetting, by some simplifying in the same sector. So we are in very close contact with the experts in Germany, like Mr. Ludewig from Kontrollnormsrat, Mr. Happenstadt and others, because we really want to use the opportunity to make sure that we will cut red tape.
So watch this space, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we are almost out of time, and I want to put you all on the spot and try and identify what your priorities are from each other. And Pekka, I would like to start with you. And my question really is, if you were him for one day, you were the Vice President, and you could only do one thing to really ensure, I'm not suggesting there is one solution, but one key next step to set us on the right track, to make sure we stay on the right track, to deliver prosperity, people, planet. What would you do with your one day? Instead of being a CEO for a day, as you're going to be, you will be him. What are you going to do?
I would use that one day to convince Presidents Trump, Putin and Xi to sit down to start discussing a global carbon market.
Thank you very much indeed. Ambassador, if
Yes.
you were in the EU generally shoes for a day, and you're listening to this discussion with ourselves about what we need to do internally as well as working with you, what would you advise?
Yes, just one or two. One, of course, horizontal thinking, and then let everybody get out of silos. That's point one. Point two is if I were, of course, the Honorable Vice President or President of the European Commission, I would definitely convene a meeting of the ethics specialists or philosophers or political thinkers, also to discuss what I call the eco-etica. That is a Latin word, ethics on ecosystem. And then this requires, of course, how to relate yourself, human being, how to relate human being to the environment. But more importantly, yesterday I saw she came. Greta came here.
Yep.
So my final point is, I think we also have to factor in that our obligation to our next generation. So that also requires discussion, real discussion of values and ethics.
Thank you very much indeed. Steffen, you're the Vice President for a day. What are you going to do?
I would send all my colleagues into responsible business position for a limited time, that they can understand how business is thinking and how it is likely to work under the circumstances they as Commission members settle up for business. And I hope that will improve the Commission's work for the future.
Thank you very much indeed. Carolyn, what are you going to do with your day?
I would convene a group of large and small businesses to draw up the blueprint for a national skills mission for Europe, designed to deal with the lifelong learning challenge that we're going to face over the next 2 decades.
Thank you, and then we're going to come back on that issue in one of our parallel sessions this afternoon on skills. Dita, I'm turning it round now. You are no longer a policy maker, you're now a captain of industry. I'm really trying to identify what you want from them. You've got one day in charge as a CEO of a major company. What are you going to do with it?
Talk and talk with my employees why trade is good.
Because you think people within companies don't necessarily?
No, and I think that's it's our common responsibility. It's not just the responsibility of the business, not the sole responsibility of the politicians, but we really lost the trust of citizens. We saw it with Brexit, we see it with the trade agenda, and for me this is worrying. And it will come again also with the digital revolution that we are living through. We need to talk with the employers, we need to talk with the citizens.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. You're the CEO. What are you going to do?
I take up that invitation. I think it will be mutually useful, and I would also ask my colleagues CEO to set for 1 or 2 days in the European Parliament, so they would see, how complex the negotiations sometimes could be. But if I would be a CEO at this stage, I think I would do something like our colleagues from whom you are going to hear the Norwold did 2 years ago. They came up with a PowerPoint, and today they're in a situation they have 10 billion euros of orders for the batteries for 2030. Why? Because they take a longer-term perspective. They concentrated on the strategic, new, emerging megatrend technology, and they've been really getting support from everyone, from the government, from the business partner, from the European Investment Bank, from the European Commission. And I think these are the mini alliances we have to build about the promising companies which are focused on the future. And I think that would be good partnership example also for others in the business.
So to our prosperity, our people, our planet, we add a 4th P, partnership. Ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed? We are going to take a 30-minute break. Now coffee is served outside, and then back here at 11:30. Please come back when you hear the bell ring. We're going to have our first deep dive in some of the issues we've been touching on ensuring industrial leadership and rewarding innovation in fast-evolving value chains, which will be moderated by my good friend Sean Klein. So enjoy the coffee break and see you back here in 30 minutes.